clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now, it's time to roll back and start the first case.
You're listening to the First Case podcast.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of the First Case podcast. I'm your host, Justin Poulin, and today I'm going to be introducing you to the co-hosts of First Case, Paul Wafer, Melanie Perry, and Jeremy Gibson-Roart. This season's going to feature 26 episodes released every other week, and we'll be covering a wide range of perioperative topics, and I'll let the cat out of the bag a little bit. This may be the first episode that all of the listeners are going to be hearing, but it's not the first episode that we've recorded. So we already have a pretty good preview of some of the excellent interviews that are going to be coming up over the next several months. And so we'll try not to have any spoilers on this inaugural episode, but I do want our audience to get to know everyone that they're going to be listening to every few weeks here throughout 2021. So let's start to get to know everybody just a little bit at a time, and then we'll have more of a roundtable discussion. So we're going to start with Paul Wafer, founder of Alpha Consulting Group Incorporated. And Paul, I know you through a mutual friend in my first podcast in the healthcare industry focused on sterile processing, somebody that you have worked with on many consulting engagements, Hank Balch. And so it's great to have you as a part of this project. And why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your background?
Well, thanks, Justin. I'm so happy to be here, really. It's an honor to be a part of this, and I'm very excited about it. It's hard to put a 44-year career into 60 seconds or so, but I will tell you that I've been very lucky in my career and had many different roles. I started out as an orderly after getting a degree in biology in 1976 because I didn't get into medical school and I didn't know what I wanted to do. After working in the OR for a few years, I realized that I wanted to become a nurse. So I got my nursing degree in 1980. By 1983, I was already director of an OR. So I went back to school and got an MBA in 1988 because I really wanted to learn how to manage people appropriately and get all the budget stuff under my belt so I understood it better. So after doing that, I moved to Arizona for a few years and worked at a really busy hospital that did about 17,000 cases a year in 13 operating rooms. Then in the 90s, I was recruited back to California and ended up working with a group of physicians, the Kirtland Job Group at Centinela Hospital. They're world famous in orthopedics. And I was able to work with professional athletes from all over the country. And it was just a really exciting and wonderful experience. Centinela also gave me the opportunity to broaden my horizons. They gave me a bunch of different departments after I'd been there for a few years. I ended up having radiology, physical therapy, dialysis, other nursing units. It was really a great experience. And when my boss left, they asked me if I wanted to be the new chief nursing officer. I knew I wanted to move on from Centinela because I'd been there 10 years. So I took the role on an interim basis until they hired a new CNO. Then after the new CNO was hired there, I left became a CNO COO at a smaller hospital, a 150-bed hospital, and later became a CEO of that same facility. So after doing that for a while, I realized that being a CEO wasn't all it was cracked up to be. I thought I'd be my own boss, but then I found out I had the corporate people and the board of directors to answer to. So I wasn't really my own boss, and I decided I'm going to do something so I can be my own boss. And I founded Alpha Consulting Group, which was a consulting firm that just worked in the perioperative arena. And I've done that for the last 16 years. It's the best thing I ever did. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, being your own boss is so key. And we're going to come back to that. And I also like the fact that you started as an orderly. And there's a theme there about really understanding all levels and how that applies to not only running your own organization and being your own boss, but also performing as a CEO. So we're going to put a pin in that, but I'm coming back, so you're warned. Melanie, let's go to you next. And I think how we found you is Hank Balch is always looking for great online groups, either Facebook groups or communities on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. And you happen to run one of the best of them. You are the creator of the Circulating Life on Facebook. Tell us about your background, but also how you started the Circulating Life.
Oh, absolutely. It's great to be here. I am an OR circulator and I am an orthopedic team leader. I love the OR. I actually got my bachelor's degree in nursing back in 2002. And because my husband was in the Navy, moved around a lot and worked in different departments wherever I got a job as we moved. But in 2011, I landed in the OR and I found my home and I love it. It's just my favorite place to be. And while I was new to the OR and trying to figure out this crazy place, I looked online for places where I could maybe find somebody who knew what it was like or was talking about what life was like when you're trying to learn the OR. And I didn't really find anything. I mean, there's AORN and they have a lot of information, but I wanted that personal, somebody that could personally relate to, and I didn't find it. So I decided to create it. So the Circulating Life was born out of my desire to find something that I couldn't find. And I made a blog and I write about the quirky life that we live when we work in the OR. And then Facebook kind of came from that, and Instagram as well. And it's just a community where people can share their experiences of how frustrating it is, how fun it is, how sometimes sad it is, and how sometimes amazing it is. It's just a community that people can all relate to.
Well, there's something, again, a theme in your background, which you were talking about sharing experiences. And that is absolutely something that the First Case podcast is going to be all about. We're going to be talking about other people's experiences. We're going to be relating some of the theory or some of the guidelines, et cetera. And then how does that apply into our day-to-day lives? And we're going to get into some discussions around soft skills as well, not necessarily hard and fast guidelines, but we're going to be talking about culture. We're going to be talking about how to foster a positive culture, and you working within a community on Facebook and being able to do that remotely and foster that experience. You're bringing a lot to the table. So happy to have you. And then finally, we will introduce Jeremy Gibson Roark. And Jeremy, you have background as a surveyor. So we've really covered a good amount of experience from lots of different perspectives with the team that we've put together. Can you tell us more about your background leading up to the role that you play in the industry today?
I'm really excited just to be a part of this program and what we are going to be able to contribute to the OR community out there. I came into nursing kind of a roundabout way. This is actually my second career. My first career was in the financial services industry, and I did that for a couple of years and figured out that I wasn't real good sitting behind a desk for long periods of time. So I decided to go back to school and get my nursing degree, and finished my nursing degree in 2005. Originally, my plan was to be a CRNA. That was my goal when I started nursing school. And so I went straight to work in the ICU, and I worked there for a little bit, and I started to get to know some of the CRNAs, and one of them said, hey, you need to come down to the OR and spend a day or two. So I actually got a PRN job in the OR about 6 months after I graduated from nursing school. And I absolutely fell in love with it and learned real quick that the CRNA role wasn't for me, mainly because it required sitting still for too much time. So I started circulating in the OR and scrubbing in the OR. I did that here locally in Texas for about 2 years, and then I moved off to New York City and worked in the OR in New York City for 6 years, where I then began my career in management and did that for a year in New York City. Then moved back here to Texas and managed a OR, medium-sized OR. We had 21 ORs, did about 12,000 cases a year, and 12 to 14,000, and then was promoted into the director level role. I was the director for about 3 years that's a very time consuming job, and I have a family. So I decided to move on and got this exciting opportunity to work for my current employer, which is DMVGL, one of the 3 accrediting organizations out there for hospitals and healthcare organizations. And that has afforded me a lot of opportunities. I have surveyed on the accreditation side. I've moved currently now more to the certification side, where I think that I get to have a larger impact on patient care. Not that our other surveyors don't have an impact, but I did get the opportunity, and it's how Justin and I met, was, looking at sterile processing has always been a passion of mine from the time that I started in the leadership roles in the OR, and figured out real quick that this is a department that's undersourced and doesn't often get the resources it needs to complete the task that they have been asked to achieve. And so me and a team sat down and wrote a set of standards for sterile processing certification programs. And we began surveying to that almost 2 years ago today, actually. And that program has taken off and really been a success. So it's been exciting to kind of go on this journey.
Well, I hear entrepreneurial spirit in all of you. Jeremy, you created this certification. Paul, you started your own company. And Melanie, you started your own online community. And I think that's something that's probably bonded us all together. I'll do a brief background on myself. I actually was going to be a chemical engineer, and I went off to college in the early 90s and realized very quickly when I got a 10 on my first chemistry test that maybe chemical engineering was going to be a difficult prospect for me. The summer before that, I kind of landed a summer job working at a camp for disabled children and adults in the great state of Maine. It was a fantastic experience. And as I was quickly realizing that engineering might not be for me, I looked at nursing as a great opportunity. So I switched majors. None of my credits transferred except as electives. And I went on to make Dean's List my first semester in nursing. And it was a phenomenal transition for me. I worked as a CNA throughout nursing school. And then during the early years of my nursing career, I became sort of fascinated with podcasting as a side gig or a hobby, covering the Boston Celtics. And so I started a podcast, I think, long before the term podcast had actually been coined in the early 2000s. I did that and had lots of great experiences. Actually, was the first person from new media to get credentialed to cover the Boston Celtics and get access to the locker room. I was there when they won a championship in 2008. And then right around 2009, 2010, I moved my family to Pennsylvania, tried my hand in mortgages, and it went very much like my experience in chemical engineering. I got a 10 on my first test in mortgages. But I cut my teeth in sales, and that was really the end game. I wanted to move into a career in medical sales. It was definitely a difficult transition, but I wound up landing with a company that was focused on instrument repair and service. And I learned a lot about sterile processing. And while my nursing career never really took me into any aspect of perioperative services, I learned a whole lot early on, and the company was very focused on education. And I had an opportunity after about a year with the organization, being the only registered nurse on the team, to be able to speak at annual conferences for both ISHM, which is the certifying body for sterile processing technicians, and then also at the vendor booths at the AORN annual conference and expo. So really, really enjoyed that experience, and then eventually moved into being much more of an entrepreneur. So started the Beyond Clean podcast. I'm the CEO and founder there, which is our sister podcast. And then I'm also a VP of sales and part owner in a vendor credentialing organization. And I'm a clinical operations executive with another instrument repair and device repair company. So lots of varied experiences, but I'm really glad I have the three of you who have much more extensive experience in perioperative services along my side with this podcast. And I just want to thank all three of you. I know we've recorded a number of episodes before we've done this roundtable, but you have been phenomenal to work with, very professional, and you've really gotten comfortable in this setting very quickly. So kudos to all of you. And I'm really excited for what the rest of this year is going to bring for us.
Justin, there's one other thing I would like to add to what you just said, in that as OR nurses, we are always arriving for these podcasts early and are well prepared.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if there's something about OR nursing that it teaches you, it definitely teaches you to think on your feet and have some ingenuity.
Why don't we explore that a little bit? We have a decent amount of time left in our first episode. I think it's really important what you just said, Jeremy, that ingenuity, that you still get even though there's so much that is laid out in this, world that we all work in, there's also a lot of room for you to utilize your creativity and your creative spirit. It's just about getting into the right role to be able to do that to the best of your ability and based on your experiences. So can you describe a time or a situation, Jeremy, when you were able to really use that ingenuity to solve a problem or tackle a difficult day or crisis that may have come up?
I think I can. The thing that I struggled with OR nursing was, I think we all get into nursing because we're passionate about patient care, right? And an OR nurse has a very, very limited time to make a very strong connection with the patient. And to have that ability to connect with the patient, for that patient to put their trust in the OR nurse in that very brief period of time, does require a lot of ingenuity. It requires a level of communication. If you've ever worked with kids in the operating room, you have to be creative. You have to be able to communicate and think on your feet and how you can connect with that patient in that very short amount of time. So I think that that's probably where I used my ingenuity the most, was that short window of time that I have to connect with that patient and to gain their trust for the period of time that I'm going to care for them in the OR.
So empathy is another very critical sort of soft skill that we all need to have. And that's either in taking care of a patient, or that can be leading a team. And so, Paul, I told you I wasn't going to let you off the hook, but you mentioned starting as an orderly. And I feel like that when you got to the CEO level, you had a lot of empathy for what that job may have been like, or other jobs that may not be leadership jobs, or they may not be managers or directors. But it would seem to be that your experiences as an orderly allowed you to be a better CEO because you could really understand the position that all the different employees and their motivations and the role that they had to play within the organization. Would you say that's true, or would you change that a little bit?
I would say that it helped me in every aspect of my career as I moved on into different positions, because number one, I always felt it was important to recognize everybody that I was working with, whether as a CEO or as an RN or as a consultant. So I always took the time to say hello and talk to folks and find out how things were going for them. I also knew that there were stresses. I mean, as an orderly, one of the big things was the time crunch. Get that room turned over as quick as you can. Get that trash out of the room. Help me get this stuff set up. So they're important members of the team, just like everybody else. And I always found it super important to make sure that all levels of the organization felt comfortable. And even as a CEO, I would have monthly meetings where I'd bring as much of the team together as I could to recognize and reward folks. You can never do that enough.
So I'm going to tie that into, Melanie, the way that you describe the blog, The Circulating Life. You say that it's focused on OR nursing with a heavy dose of reality and humor mixed in. And Paul was just talking about that culture, that community, that connectedness, and really making sure that everybody has that sense of purpose and feeling like they're part of the team. And we were talking about how the Facebook page and the blog, it brings in this, part of humor. And I think that's such a critical part of building culture and community. Like, we all got to lighten up once in a while. And by taking that edge off, it allows us to have this space to foster really great relationships. Can you elaborate on the humor part?
Sure. I mean, honestly, some days our jobs are so stressful that if you don't laugh, you're just going to cry, because it's hard. We run from the time we start to the time we finish. There's demands placed on us from surgeons, from leadership, from patients, from charge nurses. Everybody around us is so just pulling on us for everything that they need. And we have all this stuff that we're trying to focus on and balance. And if you just sometimes can't just make fun of the stupidity of some of the stuff that happens, or sometimes you just have to laugh at what's going on around you so that you can cope and you can get through the day. And when people have that, like I said before, there's that shared experience. Oh yeah, that was just crazy, or this was just wild, or seeing that somebody else just walks in their shoes and knows what it's like. It just kind of helps make it better.
Yeah, I just wanted to tie into that real quick, Melanie. Just given the environment that I know we're currently working in, and since you're actually the only one of us that is currently working as a circulator in the OR, I'm curious as to what the mentality is like, what the mood is like right now during this time. I know that many OR nurses faced furloughs, or OR staff faced furloughs, and I'm sure that's consistently in the back of their head. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I know that from at the beginning, back in March, when things started shutting down originally with COVID, what I saw a lot of from people on the Facebook page who would talk about it was they were nurses and there were scrub techs who were suddenly on unemployment. Their job was just gone, and they didn't know if they were going to have a job again, or if there was going to be work for them to do, or when they were going to be able to come back, or nurses being floated to other departments who had never done anything but OR nursing. And I mean, OR nurses are fantastic, and we can multitask and learn very quickly, but our comfort level with going to an ICU when we've not been trained there and being expected to work immediately, that adds a huge level of stress to a situation that's already stressful. I've seen, nurses have gone back to work and the ORs are back up and functioning. And, my own OR went from being shut down, no electives, emergencies only, to just busting at the seams, doing, getting everything, it seems like, caught up from when we were shut down. And then now there's this kind of the strain of it all is just continuing. And then you don't know if my patient is going to test positive, and then are we all going to be exposed? Am I going to take this home to my family? Because you just don't know day in and day out with the patients that you're doing if they're going to be sick, or we're going to find out later, and then people are going to get sick. And so there's just a lot of continued stress with everybody in the OR as we continue doing the jobs that we love, but with that extra strain of COVID. It's definitely been a unique and stressful experience, I think.
I can kind of relate that back to the mid 80s when HIV first appeared on the scene. When I first started in the OR, there was no such thing. And blood and body fluid precautions, heck, it was kind of a badge of honor if you had a little bit of blood on your scrubs during the day, and of course that's all changed. But so it's very frightening now with all these bugs that are out there to be in that environment. It's a whole different world compared to when I started back in the late 70s, early 80s, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that oftentimes is a misconception about OR nurses. There's this thought that all we do is sit on a stool in a corner. And it's so much more than that. I find it ironic that, in this time of a great healthcare need, that we had a significant amount of RNs out there that were furloughed, and people don't realize that because of their skill set. So it's just interesting.
It really was heartbreaking reading all of the comments back in March and April from so many OR people just across the country who were just facing joblessness or that uncertainty. And that's something that in healthcare, we've always kind of been away from that because healthcare is such a vital job. And then now suddenly we're looking at nothing. And I felt really bad for a lot of people when all of this happened.
Well, I'll tell you, it is trying times, and I'm hoping that this podcast will just be one of the ways that all of the healthcare providers that are listening to this podcast, regardless of their role in perioperative services, that we can be one small piece of how they get re-energized or reset as they continue to work in an ever stressful environment. Probably, to your point, Melanie and Paul, as stressful an environment as you may have ever seen. And then on the other hand, there are some people that are waiting to get an opportunity to get back to work, and maybe we can help them pass the time. And again, if we can just be a small piece of that, I want to look ahead. I want to look ahead with some optimism for what we're going to be doing here on the First Case podcast. And so I'm going to go around the horn. I'm going to ask each of you maybe some final thoughts on what you're looking forward to as we go through this first year of podcasts, or something that you're really excited to talk about, or some themes that you think are going to really play out. Let's start with Jeremy. We'll go in reverse order from the introductions at the beginning. So Jeremy, you get to go first. What are some final thoughts? What are you excited about, or what are you excited to talk about on the First Case podcast?
I think I'm excited to bring in our subject matter experts and get some different perspectives on some common problems that we've all seen. I have the unique opportunity to go across the country into hospitals and see things and different ways things are done. And I think just having the opportunity to share some of those experiences, both from my perspective as well as our subject matter experts that we'll be interviewing through the course of the season, just being able to impart that knowledge on everyone and just being a part of something bigger is really what I'm excited about.
And Melanie, I'll throw it over to you.
I'm just looking forward to everybody that we're going to be talking to. The people that we've already talked to already are so knowledgeable, and I've learned a lot just by listening in on their interviews. One of the things that I do like to encourage people that are on my blog or on my page is encourage certification and all these things. I'm super excited that we're talking about that coming up. I think it's so valuable for people to increase their education and benefit themselves, because then it benefits their patients when they've, gotten certified and added that education. But overall, I'm just really looking forward to all of the things that we're going to be talking about and the people we're going to be talking to.
And Paul, why don't you close us out before we wrap our very first episode?
One of the things that I think is going to be really important, and one of the things that always bothers me about the OR, is we have these little things that occur, and they little things that get under your skin in the OR. And it could be a workflow issue or a product issue. And I think it's going to be really important for us to try and identify those kinds of things, those common denominator items that get under people's skin, and try and help them find solutions through this podcast. So whether it's preparing a patient for surgery and making sure that everything is done correctly by a preoperative nurse, or whether it's the nurse going to pick up that patient and trying to find the nurse and getting report from them, these are little things that happen all the time that put people on edge. And if we can eliminate some things like that, I think it'll benefit everybody. So I'm hoping that as we talk to these subject matter experts, we'll get into some of those little details and solve some big problems.
Well, they do say the devil is in the details. And one detail that we didn't miss here was getting 3 great hosts for this show. I am looking forward to learning from the 3 of you, and then the network that you've already begun to reach out to bring on some really great guests to cover some excellent topics. And I think we're going to be starting out with a bang. And I just want to thank all of you for committing to this. This has been just the last, 6 weeks. We've recorded nearly 8 or 9 episodes. I've never seen so much passion and enthusiasm right out of the gate for starting a podcast. Usually there's a great deal of trepidation, and you 3 have jumped right into it. And I know that our listeners are really going to be enjoying your perspectives and the guests that you've lined up for them over the coming year. So very excited for that. That's going to do it for our very first episode of the First Case podcast. And as a reminder, or it's not a reminder, let me tell you for the first time that you can support First Case by subscribing on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is going to be very important to the success of the launch of this show. And on behalf of Melanie, Jeremy, Paul, and myself, thank you for listening to this episode of First Case.